as for the editorial, we're not surprised by President Putin's words. But the fact is that Russia offers a stark contrast that demonstrates why America is exceptional. Unlike Russia, the United States stands up for democratic values and human rights in our own country and around the world. And we believe that our global security is advanced when children cannot be gassed to death by a dictator.
So that was moments ago in the White House press room. That was Jay Carney responding to a question about Russian President Vladimir Putin's op-ed today in the New York Times when he talked about the Syrian crisis and basically scolded the United States and said that we didn't know how to run things here. New concerns arise over America's escalating role in Syria as we learn that the United States is, after 2.5 years, now deciding that we will arm the rebel forces. And which rebel forces might they be? Okay, those are the two big questions here. The new report says that the CIA has been shipping weapons into the country over the past 2 weeks. Think about that. Over the past 2 weeks. So there's new questions about how our government's ability will be to keep track of those to make sure that they don't fall into the wrong hands. So we've got two different issues that we want to deal with here with Colonel Oliver North, Fox News military analyst. Colonel, welcome. Always good to have you with us. First things first, it's interesting because moments ago we were watching John Kerry in Geneva talking about the great relationship that we're working on here with Russia, that we want to get together with them to help disable and control the chemical weapons in Syria. Then just a couple minutes later, Jay Carney steps up and scolds Russia back and says, don't you write this editorial about us. We know more about democracy and saving people than you do.
Well, in that, John Kerry is right. But the rest of this whole thing, Martha, is so surreal that it's hard to get your head around it. I could not have imagined that we would have had a president of the United States hand over to Vladimir Putin the credibility of the office of the president of the United States. In other words, this is all about trust. Who do you trust? Do you trust Vladimir Putin? I don't. I don't think most Americans would. I don't think anybody in our national security apparatus would who knew anything. But what we have now done is we have handed to Putin. Putin's original goal was to simply hang on to his base at Tartus, Syria, the only base outside the Black Sea. And he has now expanded that to become the arbiter of what will happen in the Middle East. Vladimir Putin wrote his thesis for his master's degree on how we brought the Soviet Empire down. And we brought the Soviet Empire down by Ronald Reagan driving down the price of oil so that they couldn't make the kind of money on it that they expected. Russia is a dying country. He knows it. We know it. He loses 1 million people a year in Russia in population because nobody immigrates there and they don't reproduce. So what does Vladimir Putin have? He has nuclear weapons. He has chemical and biological weapons as well. But he also has oil and gas. To the extent that he can keep things turbulent in the Middle East, and he now has essentially the authority to do so because that's what's just been handed to him, and that's what's evident in this op-ed that he wrote, he now can keep the price of oil at over $100 a barrel, where they make money on it in Russia. You notice the price of oil went up by almost $1 today, just today. So what Putin has now got is the authority, the credibility to be an arbiter of what happens in the Middle East. Worst of all, he can become the person who says, I've brought about this peace situation. I've gotten rid of the chemical weapons in Syria. Now let's go after the Israeli nuclear weapons. And of course, that's been long a goal of Russia. That's one of the reasons why the chemical munitions were in Iraq and Syria. Who gave them to them? The Soviet Union. And so all of this coming from the new peacemaker in the Middle East is, I say, surreal at best.
Yeah. It's an interesting argument that you make and background and history that you bring to the table with oil prices. Talking about this the other day, we're talking about one of the best weapons we could employ would be to lower world oil prices so that would not be a feather in his cap.
So how would you do that? You would build the XL pipeline and you'd encourage fracking and you'd encourage offshore drilling.
Become energy independent.
None of which this administration is doing, by the way.
All right, let's talk about this other issue quickly. 2 weeks ago, very interesting, they began to arm the CIA to give them weapons to help to get these rebels up on their feet who are in that sliver that is called the moderate opposition down the middle that is not connected, we don't think, to al-Qaeda.
Well, what's very interesting, of course, that's a leak from a senior administration official today in the aftermath of all this. It came out last night. Senior administration officials said, oh no, we've really been arming the moderate opposition now for 2 whole weeks, not just a day or two. Look, back in May, the Congress authorized this. A presidential finding was done. Nothing was done until very recently at best, and perhaps as long as 2 weeks ago. The reality of it is we have allowed the moderate opposition to be overwhelmed by Erdogan in Turkey, who is a Muslim Brotherhood protege, and he has appointed, in General Idris, a man who is malleable to that. When you've forced aside Colonel Riyad, who was the founder of the Free Syrian Army. Now, here's what needs to be done. And pay attention, Mr. Obama, because this can work. Direct the CIA in a new finding to go out and hire 1,000 former military personnel who have experience in that part of the world, put them under employment and direction of a real clandestine service in the CIA, and they actually have a handful of people left in it, and have them build a real freedom fighter army of Syrian opponents to the regime who are not radical Islamists, who understand secular law, and who will be trained and equipped and fielded to become a real freedom fighter army. Now, does that stop the bloodletting? It won't tomorrow. But you know what? More Syrian kids
and who
were
would
killed
these people
today.
would not be Americans?
No. You'd have Americans who were recruited to train them in places, for example, like Jordan. You couldn't do it in Lebanon. You can't do it in Iraq anymore because Mr. Obama gave that up.
A lot of people think it's too late for this.
It's not too late. I've got a little experience helping freedom fighters get weapons and train and win.
We'll leave it there. Colonel Oliver North. Interesting. We're going to see where this goes. Thank you, sir. Pleasure to talk to you as always.
Fine.